All right. It's been a day. You all heard from Scott Anderson. You will hear from me. And then at 2 p.m., we will have the briefing on Lebanon with Ted Chabon, the Deputy Executive Director for UNICEF, joining us in person, and Carl Scow, the Deputy Executive Director of the World Food Program, joining us virtually. They will both brief you on their recent visit to Lebanon. Also, just programming note for tomorrow around noon after Fahan briefs, because I will not be here today, tomorrow and Friday. The High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, will be here as our guest. Then immediately following that, our colleagues from the Department of Economic and Social Affairs will brief on the launch of the World Social Report 2024, entitled Social Development in Times of Converging Crises, a call for global action. Then, if you still have room to write stories, at 1:30 p.m. there will be a briefing by the Special Rapporteur on trafficking in persons, especially women and children, and that rapporteur is Shovan Mulali. This morning, the Secretary General of the United Nations spoke at the Fifth Committee of the General Assembly, which, as you know, is the Money Committee. He spoke on the proposed program budget for 2025. The Secretary General said that in a context of global shocks, the United Nations is more needed now than ever with our unmatched convening power. He added that 2025 program budget proposal reflects the priorities set out in the Pact of the Future, the Global Digital Compact, and the Declaration for Future Generations. The Secretary General also said that the organization will continue to work to cement its reforms. Some of the proposals he highlighted included continued investment in sustainable development, human rights, boosting support for the unprecedented humanitarian challenges in Gaza, advancing peace and security, and strengthening the UN's capacity in investigations and ethics. His remarks were shared with you earlier. I will start off with Lebanon because I think you did get quite a bit on Gaza just now. Our peacekeeping colleagues in southern Lebanon report that intense exchange of fire along and beyond the blue line continued over the last 24 hours. The peacekeepers recorded about 58 air violations, the highest number for a 24-hour period since October 8th. UNIFIL also detected 1,279 projectiles across the blue line, the third highest since October 8th. 1,208 originated from the south of the blue line heading north. 71 were left from the north heading south across the blue line. The mission also reported that indirect fire and firing from close to UN positions caused material damage to UN equipments and facilities in Deir Amis in the sector west and the Shaba in sector east of the peacekeeping's area of operations. Fortunately, no peacekeepers were wounded in these incidents, but they do continue to put our peacekeepers who are serving in southern Lebanon to support implementation 1701 at serious risk. We reiterate that the safety and the security of our UN personnel and property must be ensured by all actors on the ground, and that the inviolability of the premises of the United Nations must be respected at all times by all parties. Meanwhile, the Special Coordinator for Lebanon, Janine Hennis-Plasschaert, continued her intensive engagements with all actors to urge an immediate ceasefire and that space be given for a diplomatic solution in line with Security Council Resolution 1701. Following further strikes that resulted in civilian deaths today near Nabatea, the Special Coordinator emphasized a statement that violations of international humanitarian law are utterly unacceptable. Civilians and civilian infrastructure must be protected at all times, she said. And the Secretary General yet again condemns the loss of civilian life that we have seen. Also, on the humanitarian front, our humanitarian colleagues report multiple airstrikes in Nabatea and nearby areas in southern Lebanon. So far, according to local authorities, 6 fatalities have been confirmed, including the mayor of the town, as well as members of the Disaster Risk Management Unit that were killed on the strike on the municipal building during a relief management meeting. Our health partners tell us that the violence continues to push an already overwhelmed health system to the brink, with devastating impact on medical care amid huge health needs. Since September 17th, the World Health Organization says it has verified 23 attacks on health care facilities. It also flags the impact of intense bombardment and insecurity, which are forcing a growing number of health facilities to shut down, particularly in the south of the country. Out of 207 primary health care centers and dispensaries in conflict areas, 100 are now closed. Despite these challenges, WHO and its partners continue to support Lebanese health authorities to provide medical supplies for trauma care, cholera prevention. WHO also continues to coordinate with the Lebanese Red Cross and hospitals to equip blood banks with adequate supplies, and is also working with the Department of Public Health to establish trauma centers within the existing hospitals. On education, Lebanese authorities tell us that 77% of public schools cannot provide education services due to either being used as collective shelters or because they are in areas of conflict. Meanwhile, we, along with our partners, are continuing to support the Lebanese response, including by providing food, shelter, water, sanitation, and hygiene assistance, but they warn that they are facing operational challenges due to the volatile security situation. Back here this morning, Joyce Masuya briefed the Security Council at their request on the situation in Gaza. She said in just 1 week, nearly 400 Palestinians were reportedly killed in Gaza and almost 1,500 injured. The world has seen the images of patients and displaced persons sheltering near Al-Aqsa Hospital burning alive, she said. Since the beginning of October, she told Council, we estimate that over 55,000 people have been displaced from the Jabalia area, while others remain stranded in their homes with water and food running out. Only 3 of the 10 hospitals in northern Gaza Governorate are now operational, and those are only at minimum capacity, she told council members. These facilities are facing dire shortages of the most basic items, and women are giving birth under heavy bombardment, she said. Those remarks were shared with you. From the ground, our humanitarian colleagues tell us that our partners are providing nutrition support in the Gaza Strip, and they are working to reopen a medical facility in the Gaza Governorate after mass evacuation orders and escalating hostilities forced 3 other medical points there and in northern Gaza to just shut down. Those closures have compromised the treatment of about 2,000 acutely malnourished children in northern Gaza. Meanwhile, the distribution of nutrition assistance continues for children under the age of 5, as well as pregnant and breastfeeding women. More than 85% of children in Gaza are estimated to face severe food poverty as of last month. And since January, partners have provided nearly 586,000 one-month nutrient supplements, and 147,000 children have received high-energy biscuits. These children are reportedly consuming less than 2 types of food every day, which indicates nearly non-existent levels of dietary diversity. Our partners are warning that despite attempts to scale up nutrition support, they continue to face severe constraints, including supply chain complications, shrinking space for humanitarian operations, and ongoing displacement. Meanwhile, they warn that the reduction in access to health services due to the evacuation orders and hostilities, especially in the north, will further delay the detection and start treatment for malnourished children and compromise efforts to follow up with children already being treated. Our partners are working to support Gaza's beleaguered health system, are doing everything possible to reach people across the Gaza Strip with life-saving support. That includes administering the polio vaccine, which the second round of the vaccination campaign continued today. WHO reports that over the past 2 days, nearly 157,000 children in central Gaza have received the second dose of the vaccine. At the same time, more than 128,000 have received vitamin A supplements. We and our partners continue to call for the parties to respect the agreed-upon humanitarian pauses required for the vaccination campaign to proceed safely and on schedule. Turning to Syria, our humanitarian colleagues there are warning about the impact of an uptick in hostilities in Idlib and western Aleppo. Local health authorities in Syria report that since yesterday, 2 civilians, including a 5-year-old girl, were killed in separate shelling attacks, and at least 11 people were injured. Critical infrastructure has also been impacted as the area experiences its first series of airstrikes in 3 months. Yesterday, 2 airstrikes hit a power station west of Idlib city, knocking out electricity to water stations, serving as the main source of water for nearly 30,000 people living in 17 surrounding villages. And on Monday, at least 3 airstrikes hit just a few kilometers from a tent settlement in Idlib, where a UN delegation led by David Carden, our deputy humanitarian coordinator for the region, was overseeing a WFP distribution service to displaced families. The UN delegation, which included OCHA, WFP, and UNHCR, also visited a community center that is providing legal assistance and psychosocial support to displaced families, including those who fled from Lebanon recently. WFP is appealing for international support to address the escalating humanitarian crisis in Syria amid the influx of people fleeing the war in Lebanon. The food security situation in Syria is worsening, with more than half of the population facing food insecurity and some 3 million people in the grip of severe hunger conditions. Carl Scow, as you know, the deputy executive director from WFP, warned that people are reaching a breaking point, saying that the international community must step up. And you will have seen that last night we issued a readout of the informal dinner hosted by the Secretary General with the leaders of the Greek Cypriot community, Nikos Christodoulidis, and the leader of the Turkish Cypriot community, Mr. Ersin Tatar. The Secretary General recalled the engagement of his personal envoy on Cyprus, Maria Angela Holgun Cuellar, and regretted that despite her efforts and engagement, no common ground had been found between the leaders on the way forward on the Cyprus issue. The Secretary General encouraged leaders to consider how to bridge the gap in their positions and rebuild trust to allow movement leading to a settlement. The leaders did agree to an informal meeting in a broader format in the near future under the auspices of the Secretary General to discuss the way forward. They also agreed to meet in Cyprus to explore the possibility of opening new crossings. And in Ukraine, our humanitarian coordinator there, Matthias Schmale, led an interagency humanitarian convoy to Kherson City, carrying vital aid, including hygiene kits, dignity kits, solar lamps, and power stations. Attacks in the frontline regions of Donetsk, Kharkiv, and Kherson yesterday and today resulted in casualties and damage to residential buildings and schools. That's what local authorities are telling us. Meanwhile, the ongoing hostilities also led authorities in the Kharkiv region to expand mandatory evacuation orders to some 7,000 people, most of whom are elderly. Humanitarian organizations continue to provide assistance to affected people across the country. So far this year, humanitarians have supported more than 7 million people across Ukraine. And turning to Sudan, the Office of the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says they're deeply concerned about people being displaced by conflict in several parts of Sudan. Just to give you some context about this dire situation, which is sadly underreported due to the lack of access to journalists and humanitarians, the UN Refugee Agency says that due to the intensifying conflict in Darfur, close to 25,000 people have arrived in eastern Chad in the first week of October alone. That's the highest number of new arrivals this year within a single week, and higher than in the whole month of September. And in Chad, which is already host to 600,000 Sudanese refugees, that's more than any other country. According to UNHCR, nearly 3 million refugees and returnees have now fled Sudan after 18 months of hostilities, crossing borders to seek safety in neighboring countries. Aside from Chad, they're mainly fleeing to the Central African Republic, Egypt, Ethiopia, Libya, South Sudan, and Uganda. Inside Sudan itself, the International Organization for Migration estimates that some 40,000 men, women, and children have been newly displaced in the first half of October alone, amid escalating hostilities in some parts of the country, as well as the rainy season. As the rainy season ends, this brings the total number of internally displaced in Sudan since this phase of a conflict began to nearly 8.2 million human beings. With the rain subsiding and more roads now passable, this is a crucial time for aid organizations to move vital supplies quickly to areas where the needs are most acute. OCHA calls on all parties to the conflict to stop the fighting, to protect civilians, and facilitate humanitarian access. Meanwhile, we and our partners are working with Sudanese health authorities to scale up the cholera response. This includes large-scale immunization. As of yesterday, 24,000 cholera cases, including about 700 related deaths, have been reported since mid-July. The ordeal of refugees continues after they cross borders. UNHCR tells us that they're seeing a surge of families arriving in Chad exhausted, many having walked for days through conflict zones. A health center in Chad called Birak Health Center has been overwhelmed. UNHCR is working to coordinate the relocation of thousands from the border areas. However, funding limitations are slowing down the provision of basic services for these refugees. The Sudan Regional Refugee Response Plan for $1.5 billion is only 27% funded. And almost lastly, in heading south to South Sudan, our peacekeeping mission there issued today its quarterly brief on violence affecting civilians, as the results are rather horrifying, to say the least. The report covers a period between April and June of this year. It recorded a steep increase in the number of violent incidents and number of victims compared to the same period in 2023. Particularly concerning is that abductions increased by 181%, while a 168% rise in the number of victims of sexual violence was recorded. Intercommunal and intracommunal violence by community-based militias and other civil defense groups remain the primary source of this violence. Nick Haysom, the head of the mission, called for continued effort by authorities and communities to peacefully resolve long-standing conflict drivers. And finally, today is World Food Day. In his message, the Secretary General said that on this day, we remind ourselves of the 733 million people who are short on food because of conflict, marginalization, climate change, poverty, and economic downturns, including those who face the threat of man-made famine in Gaza and Sudan. On this day, he added, let's step up the fight against hunger and malnutrition. Margaret, and then Pam.
Thanks, Steph. Did the Secretary General have a phone call with the Iranian Foreign Minister yesterday, and do you have a readout?
Indeed, he did. The Secretary General did speak to the Foreign Minister of Iran. The call was During the call, the Secretary General urged Iran to appeal to the Houthis for the immediate release of all detained UN staff. The Secretary General highlighted that such actions on the part of the Houthis constitutes violations of privileges and immunities of UN staff. He called for all detained to be released, highlighting how such continued actions by the Houthis is detrimental to the UN's work in Yemen for the people of Yemen, which benefits the suffering Yemeni population's vast current needs. They, of course, also discussed the need for de-escalation in the region.
And just following up on that, did the Iranian express concerns to him about the escalation with Israel specifically, about retaliation?
I think for the Iranian side of the conversation, I would refer you to their readout.
Well, what did the SG say about it then?
Well, the Secretary General expressed his concern at the continuing risks of escalation and reiterated his call to all parties involved to do whatever they can to move in the other direction.
And do you just have a readout, sorry, on
okay.
the dinner last night between the Cypriot leaders?
We
Is there a
issued
readout?
it last
Oh,
night,
there
and I
was.
just
Okay,
read
yeah,
it
you're
out
right, there
about
was. I'm sorry,
95
I'm
seconds ago.
multitasking.
That's okay, me too. I barely know what I'm talking about.
Well, for fear of also repeating, the Secretary General is headed for BRICS.
We do not have any travel to
Confirmation.
confirm at this time.
Okay, and so I thought there had been one. So we'll know in the next few days if he's going to
We will
Russia?
have, as soon as we're able to confirm travel,
right.
and then we will do so.
Okay, and the second is what happened with the Secretary General's budget in the Fifth Committee?
He delivered his remarks, which we shared with you.
And is it approved? I mean,
Well,
it
as you know, the
takes a
General
while,
Assembly,
yeah.
it's a long process. It would be great
But
if.
were there objections? Was
Well, I
everyone-
mean, the meeting was open, so I can't, again, this is a whole process, and you know, General Assembly usually approves the budget towards the end of the year.
Yes. Okay, and then the final is just.
It would be nice if it was just as simple as him presenting it and
Right,
be
and
approved,
then they
but
all
that is
say,
not the
okay,
case.
spend it. The question about the trucks in Gaza, back and forth a bit this morning, that the trucks are getting in, but the distribution is the problem. Any comment on that? I mean, I can go into more specifics.
Well, I mean,
but we heard from
yes, I mean,
Scott
there's-
Anderson, we
listen,
heard from the
situation
Israeli
is
ambassador.
the situation remains desperate, it remains dire, it remains dramatic, right? Yes, there are some trucks that came in, and we obviously welcome the arrival of of trucks. There were some that came in through the Erez West crossing. Of course, that's good, but it doesn't change the underlying issue, is that we need to have a constant flow of goods. We need to have free and unfettered humanitarian access. We need a ceasefire to be able to do the work in the measure, at the scale of which is needed.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. I think you're all briefed out, so I will release you. Yes, exactly. Goodbye.
We have another one at 2, right?
Yes.
Change?
No, it is at 2.
No,